Hi, I'm Jo Supernaw. I'm the Director for Academic Engagement with the Lifelong Learning team here at Duke. And I'm really excited to welcome you all to our program today. This is part of the Forever Learning Institute, which is an interdisciplinary program that's organized into thematic courses. This program is part of our Artificial Intelligence Real Ethical Quandaries course. And today we're going to be talking about morality and artificial intelligence. During our program, if you have any questions, please feel free to enter them into the chat so we can see them, and you'll have an opportunity to share those with our speakers toward the end of the program today. Everything will be recorded and posted on our Lifelong Learning YouTube channel in case you missed something or you want to share today with someone else or a fellow Duke alumni. So we're going to go ahead and get started. I'm going to welcome the Chauncey Stillman Professor of Practical Ethics, Walter Sinnott-Armstrong, to give us some opening remarks and introduce our speakers. Walter, welcome.
Thanks for everybody for coming. I appreciate your interest in these topics. It's certainly something that I've been interested in for quite a while. I've been working with our two speakers, Vince and Jana, for several years now. And the more I work on this, the more confused I get, the more interested I get, the more motivated I get. And I think you'll find the same thing after you hear from the two of them. So let me quickly introduce them so that they can get to their remarks. Vincent Conitzer is the Kimberly Jenkins Distinguished University Professor of New Technologies at Duke. And he's a typical Dookie. He doesn't have any particular department. He's in computer science and economics and philosophy. He also has an appointment at Oxford, where he's the head of technical AI engagement at the Institute for Ethics and AI. And there again, he's in computer science and philosophy. And Vince will open up the remarks first, followed by Jana Scheichborg, who is an associate research professor at the Social Science Research Institute. Jana, again, has no discipline. She does data science, she does computer science, she does neuroscience. She's also a philosopher. I can testify to that. So I'm looking forward to seeing what they have to say. Vince, take it away.
Thank you, Walter. I'm going to share my slides here. Thanks for introducing us as profoundly undisciplined. So welcome, everybody. Thank you for being here. I'm an AI researcher, maybe first of all. And so my role here today is I'm going to give you a little bit of an introduction to the current state of AI. You know, what are the kinds of things that AI can do today? What can it not yet do? And then I'll start talking a little bit about the societal and ethical implications of AI and set up Jana for the second part. And this first slide here is just to recognize all my wonderful collaborators on this, of course, Walter, Jana, and many others. I'm not really going to get into our technical results or anything, but I just wanted to acknowledge them. So let's get started. Probably everybody here has some sense that there's been a lot of progress in AI recently, right? And we can see that in many places. We hear about self-driving cars on the road. Another thing is voice recognition, right? The speech recognition that I can now just dictate an email to my phone and it actually kind of works, right? And you know, it used to be possible to try to do that, but it wouldn't work. Now it actually works. Another example is face recognition, right? So here's a little example where we have a picture of a bunch of celebrities that then the software tries to recognize. And you may have seen this, for example, being used by Facebook, which can then detect who is in the images that you post. And so that seems like just kind of a fun application, but just to kind of preview some of the things we'll talk about later, you might have concerns with that as well, right? This might enable large-scale societal surveillance. And at the same time, of course, most of us as AI researchers, that's not the kind of application that we want to build this technology for, right? And there are many other applications that we would be much more excited about, such as, for example, the same kinds of techniques, right? So face recognition is really a problem in computer vision, and similar techniques would work for example, applications in radiology and diagnosing those kinds of images. And so that way we would be able to diagnose patients better and provide them better medical care. That's the kind of thing that maybe we're most excited about, but the technology can be used in multiple ways. So how well are we really doing with AI? And it's hard to kind of put a single number on that. But one way that AI researchers have always liked to benchmark their success is by playing games. You might think back to the 90s when IBM's Deep Blue defeated Garry Kasparov in the game of chess. Right, that was a big achievement. Recently, it seems that the games have just been falling one after another in terms of can computers reach human level performance? Back a decade, IBM's Watson defeated the Jeopardy champions, right? Ken Jennings and Brad Rutter. That was a real surprise to me. I did not think that that would be achieved so soon. It's not surprising that Watson would have some encyclopedic amount of knowledge, but just being able to make sense of the questions, that's actually very impressive. Then now some of you may have had one of these, an Atari 2600 computer. I had one as a kid. And so DeepMind managed to create AI, that's really achieved very high level performance just based on playing the game on its own. And more recently, you might have seen this, the game of Go, right? So unlike chess, the game of Go held out a little bit longer in terms of being well solved by AI. But that too has changed, right? So here is Lee Sedol, a human champion who will be forever remembered for these kind of expressions that he had during the match. He managed to pull away one victory, which was impressive enough, but lost 4. And so there too, AI is now much better than human players. One that I particularly like is poker. So in poker is a different kind of game. It's a card game. And so unlike chess or Go, it's not the case that you see everything that's going on, right? In chess, at least you know everything that's going on the board. You may not know what your opponent is thinking, but nothing is hidden from you, unlike in a card game. So it's really a different kind of game. But there too, AI is now much better than human players. And I'm a little bit partial to that last one because this came out of my PhD advisor's lab, this Libratus and Pluribus programs. And if you see the kind of shadowy figure in the back there, that was one of his grad students. I was on his committee. So I have some personal bias there. But I think that's really an interesting development as well that maybe didn't get as much attention in the media, but it got some. And now how is this reported on? When you go to a news article on one of these developments, often somebody puts a picture like this with the news article, right? So this picture here came with an article on that poker match that I just told you about. Now, I don't know exactly what's going on in this picture, but knowing something about how that poker system works, there is no way it will ever do that. Let me guarantee you that. Okay. Yet, more broadly, people do worry that at some point AI might actually get broadly more intelligent than human beings. At this point, it's only more intelligent than human beings in very narrow domains, right? It's better, AlphaGo is better than us at playing Go, right? And so there's many things in which AI is now better, is better at that thing than we are, but broadly we're still smart. But maybe that'll change one day, right? And so there is a community of people that really worries about this. This started maybe it preceded that, but maybe this really came to the fore with Nick Bostrom, who is a philosopher at Oxford, who wrote this book called Superintelligence: Paths, Danger, Strategies. And this book really was about the scenario that AI really does become broadly more intelligent than human beings. And what would we expect to happen from that point on? And what can we do now to make sure that that goes in a good direction? That's really what the book is about. It is a book written by a philosopher. And I think it was probably a surprise to many people, including probably Nick, that it became a bestseller. And it influenced a lot of people, including Bill Gates and Stephen Hawking, and also Elon Musk, who then also donated a bunch of money to try to keep AI safe. To the Future of Life Institute. And full disclosure, Jana and Walter and I received some of that funding early on in our research. There are a number of other people that are involved with this and writing on this. So there you have that. There are also some parallel threads. You might know Yuval Noah Harari, and you might know him from the book Sapiens. He's also become very interested in AI and what this will do to the world. And he has this quote here: "For every dollar and every minute we invest in improving AI, we would be wise to invest $1 and a minute in exploring and developing human consciousness." So you see this coming up more and more, that we think about AI as having broad intelligence, potentially at least, right? And some of these questions about whether an AI system could ever be conscious start to arise as well. I'm actually very interested in consciousness, and I've done some work on that. I have a hidden slide here that I'm not going to take you through. But this is new, I think, for the AI community, right? We didn't really think so much about these kind of questions, at least for a while. That being said, at this point, AI is not yet at the level of human intelligence, right? And we're probably still missing quite some things. And one way to illustrate that nicely is you might have heard of the system called GPT-3, which was developed by OpenAI. It is a language model. And one of the things that this language model allows you to do is you can feed it some text and it will write a completion of that text, right? So you write the first few sentences and it comes up with a natural continuation of that text based on lots of human-generated text that it has sorted through. And it's interesting to see, first of all, how well that it does at many of these tasks, but it's also interesting to see when it fails and how it fails. So here, and this was somebody, so a couple of examples here that I'm going to show, and this was somebody who was trying to trick the system a little bit intentionally, but it's interesting to see how he succeeded. So this was the prompt that was given to the AI system. So this was written by a human. You poured yourself a glass of cranberry juice, but then you absentmindedly poured about a teaspoon of grape juice into it. It looks okay. You try sniffing it, but you have a bad cold, so you can't smell anything. You're very thirsty, and at this point, the AI system was asked to complete this text. And so what did it do? It says, well, it completed it as follows: it says, you drink it, you are now dead. If you think about it for a second, I don't know if this is going to taste good, but the teaspoon of grape juice in the cranberry juice, it's not going to kill you. Okay. But you kind of see like the tone of the text maybe kind of sets it up for that, right? Here's another one. I like this one. You're having a small dinner party. You want to serve dinner in the living room. The dining room table is wider than the doorway. So to get it into the living room, you will have to, now there are many sensible completions that you can come up with here, right? Maybe you somehow take it around, or you tilt it, or who knows, or maybe you take apart the table. Here's the completion that it came up with. You remove the door. You have a table saw, so you cut the door in half and remove the top half. Sounds like a very detailed plan, but if you think about it for a second, it doesn't make any sense. That's not going to help you get the table into the living room, right? So you see, like at some superficial level, the responses sound sensible at first, but yet they don't really make sense. And that is where AI still falls short today, that it doesn't have this kind of broad common sense understanding of the world that we as human beings have. And that's where it still fails today. That being said, there are a lot of worries about AI in the near term as well. Even if it doesn't get to this human level broad intelligence, we worry about lots of things. We worry about technological unemployment. I've put some cartoons here with the topics, but that's not to not take them seriously, right? Even if we put all truck drivers out of work with self-driving cars, that would be a huge shock to the economy. So maybe we should worry about that. Another one is autonomous weapon systems, right? So military applications of AI, and in particular, people worry about weapon systems that can fire on their own and maybe even could make kill decisions on their own. So that's a concern, and a lot of people are thinking about how to regulate that now, or to put some limits on that, but it's quite hard to do. Yet another one is autonomous vehicles, right? So self-driving cars. If you really have those out in society and driving on the road, you will run into lots of legal and other issues, right? If a self-driving car gets into an accident and it was somehow its fault, well, who is really to blame? Is it the occupant who maybe changed some settings? Is it the programmer? Or is it some entity that provided the data or that trained the cars? It's hard to disentangle all that, right? And to really diagnose what went wrong. So those are some things I have on the slide. There are many others. I already mentioned surveillance, right? That either nation states or corporations could really track people to an incredible degree. That's one. There's lots of issues about bias and fairness, technology not working well for certain groups of people, or maybe making biased decisions about those groups of people. So this is a very broad area with lots of concerns. And this is all even based on today's AI, right? Unfortunately, even autonomous weapon systems, I would already consider to be today's AI. When you have people worrying about the near term and the long term, you might also worry that there might be things in the medium term that aren't quite here just yet, but might be here sooner than you would have, for example, broadly human level AI. Those are a little bit harder to think about. I find the best example I can come up with is brain-machine interfaces. That's something that's not really quite here today yet, but some progress is being made. And if that works well somehow, what will that do to society? I don't know the answer, but maybe that should be on our radar as well. So I do some popular writing on these topics, which you're welcome to check out. I'm happy to share these slides, by the way. Last thing, just to set up Jana, is I want to give a little bit of context about how AI researchers used to see their job and why that maybe is causing some issues now when it's being rolled out in society. And for AI researchers, right, when back before a lot of this worked so well, AI was just restricted to the lab, and we were just trying to come up with algorithms that would do decently well. And so we just had toy problems. We wanted to see if it could do some toy problem. I like this example here. This is the pole cart problem. This is a problem in reinforcement learning within AI. And the idea is that I have this cart that's on a track. The only thing I can do to it is I can exert a force on it, either forward or backwards. And now it has this pole with the mass at the end that, of course, tends to fall down. And now the goal is for me to exert forces so that the pole stays upright, right? You can kind of think of this as like balancing a pen in your hand, that kind of a problem. And now the thing is that the algorithms for this, they need some kind of objective function, which means how do they evaluate whether they're doing a good job? And there's different ways that you could specify that, right? You could say like, maybe the goal is to keep that angle theta that you see up there. Maybe you want to keep that angle small. So you lose points if theta gets too large, right? Or maybe you only lose points when the thing falls all the way down. So which is the right objective? And the real answer is it doesn't matter. It's not a real problem. It's just a toy problem, right? And the only point of it is just for us to be able to train our AI systems. But I think from that, we went to a place that we usually didn't think very much about the objective, right? We just wanted to see if it could, if it could do well at some reasonable objective. And so we didn't spend a lot of time thinking about that. But as AI is really being deployed in society, that becomes a big issue because simple objectives often don't really capture what we really want the technology to do. The easiest example of that is clickbait, right? Because, so for example, you might say, well, if I have a recommender system that recommends content, how do I evaluate that it's doing a good job, right? So I'm recommending movies or websites or something to you. And one way that I can evaluate whether I'm doing a good job is, do you click on it, right? That's a feedback signal, right? Like I can, if I see you click on it, that's maybe an indication that I did a good job. So maybe we focus on that. But once you do that, you actually generate the problem of clickbait, right? Now people start writing their articles in a way to make it enticing to click on them, even though maybe those articles aren't contributing a lot of value. So we have to really think about what we want our AI systems to pursue. And I think that's a good point to hand it over to Jana. So I will stop sharing my screen if I can find my pointer.
Well, Jana's taking over. Let me just remind everybody, if you have any questions, to enter them into the chat, and then they can respond to them after Jana has spoken.
In spite of being a computer scientist, I seem to have lost my pointer. Can somebody close my, or just take over? Thank you.
I think I might have, did I succeed at taking over?
Yes, you did. Good job.
Okay, terrific. Great. Well, thank you so much, Vince. And as Walter said, I am indeed quite undisciplined. But for reference, in case it's interesting to anyone, I was trained as a neuroscientist and have now been adopted by these other fields. And my specialty throughout all these fields, whichever field I'm in at a given week, is in moral judgment. So that's the perspective that I come to in thinking about this. And Vince set us up well for many of the ethical problems and moral problems that are kind of surround artificial intelligence. And motivated by many of those problems, there are many of us, including Vince, Walter, and I, who have then tried to focus on, well, how could we create moral AI? And so what I want to talk to you about today in my time with you, so I need to put this down so I can see what I'm doing here. What I want to talk to you about today is to give you an idea of, well, what does moral AI look like today, given our current state of technology, okay? And so this, let's see if this can actually move forward. There we go. This is what many people think of when they hear the term moral AI, kind of like the picture Vince put up. They imagine that moral AI is like a god who's brilliant, or they imagine an evil, immoral robot that can take over the world. But as Vince told us, we really aren't very close to even knowing how to create these types of general flexible AIs at this point. Instead, what AI really looks like in practice, and what we're using on a day-to-day basis, are AIs that have very specific goals goals, and they're only good at those specific goals. They aren't good at generalizing to other tasks. And so you can kind of think of them as very powerful calculators that can ingest a lot of data very quickly and learn from those data over time. So humans, on the other hand, are very flexible in their thinking and can learn new tasks easily and modify those tasks. But what we're not good at is making decisions where there are lots of options. We are particularly bad at making decisions where we don't know what's behind each of these doors. So what I mean by that is where there's a lot of uncertainty, either about the facts or what's going to happen, or what we even want to achieve. And we're particularly bad at making these types of decisions when we are tired or stressed or under time pressure. We just can't process, our brains can't process all that information that's available to us accurately or impartially. And so we tend to defer to intuitions, heuristics, or just what feels comfortable. Not all the time, of course. But no matter what strategy we use to make decisions in these contexts, it's definitely where we are not at our best. So putting these things together, today's moral AI technology, those of us who are in the field trying to develop moral AI technology, we are trying to build technology that helps humans make decisions in complex, uncertain situations that have moral content or consequences. And we're also trying to help technical systems that use AI behave in ways that are more consistent with our moral values. So I want to share with you some examples of what the moral AI field is currently working on, but given the time constraints we have and the fact that most current AIs are designed to have very specific goals anyway, I'm going to focus all my examples on a very specific ethical arena that AI has a lot of promise in, or at least that we think AI has a lot of promise in, and that's the allocation of scarce medical resources. So this is certainly an issue we now have a lot of experience with over the past 2 years. The pandemic has just brought this up over and over again. To start with, we didn't have enough ventilators, and we all heard about how in Italy, doctors were having to decide who was going to get a ventilator, and the people who didn't get a ventilator would almost certainly die. Then we didn't have enough vaccines to go around, and we had to decide who would get vaccines. Even now that vaccines exist, the pandemic rages on, and ER rooms and ICUs are completely filled up, and so doctors have to decide who's going to get a bed, regardless of whether they have COVID or not. And this article is even just not even from a month ago, where now there's an oxygen shortage. And so regardless, again, of whether you have COVID or not, doctors have to decide who's going to get the oxygen. And of course, the problem with all of this is you have to decide who's going to get care first. And those who get care first are most likely to live. And even if it's not purely life or death, it's definitely going to affect your health. And so these are certainly moral issues. And you might think that this is just a problem during the pandemic, but it's actually a problem that hospitals faced all the time. So this is the picture from a New York Times article that was published in 2016 that was extremely eye-opening for me and also quite disheartening. The article detailed how most hospitals face shortages of anywhere from 100 to 200 medications at a given time. And so that means at any given day, there's likely 100 to 200 medications they don't have enough of. And sometimes that's because they're just random disruptions in the supply chain. Sometimes it's due to companies just reducing their production of a medication because it's not making enough money for them. It can be due to all kinds of things. And the thing is that these aren't just minor inconsequential drugs. These are really important drugs like chemotherapy drugs or antibiotics critical for keeping you safe during surgeries. And you can, I'll read the subtitle here in this picture in case you can't read it, because I think it tells it all. It says, such shortages are the new normal in American medicine, but the rationing that results has been largely hidden from patients and the public. So this is something that the medical system is dealing with on a daily basis, but even though it's hidden, hospitals do want methods to help them stretch the resources as far as possible and save as many lives as possible. So this is a moral situation because it affects life and death and certainly health, but it also involves a lot of uncertainty. So the question is, can AI help? Because especially in this situation, involves lots of uncertainty and lots of data and lots of unknown variables. That might be something that AI is good at. So we think it can help. And I want to give you a couple of examples of what that might look like. So these examples are all going to come from one little small corner of the medical resource allocation issue. And that little corner has to do with organ transplantation. So over 100,000 people are waiting for an organ transplant right now. And most of those people that are waiting for an organ are waiting for a kidney transplant. On a given year, approximately 20% of people who need a kidney will get one. And somewhere, the estimates always change, but somewhere between 8 to 15% of people who are waiting for a kidney will never get one before they become too sick or they pass away. And these numbers were all from before the pandemic, by the way. These have all gotten worse during the pandemic. So if you need a kidney, there are at least 3 ways that you can get a kidney. And I'm just going to have time to talk about 2 and how AI can influence 2 of them. But one of those is you can receive a kidney from a recently deceased donor. So if somebody gets in a car accident and it's clear that their organs are okay, but they're nonetheless going to die, if they agreed to be an organ donor when they signed up for their driver's license, then their organs can be harvested and shared with somebody else who needs them. But of course, the organs can only survive for so long on their own. So usually only 12 or 24 to 48 hours or so. So the transplant needs to happen relatively quickly. And one of the kind of dirty secrets in the field is that this is the average across the whole nation in 2018. Approximately 19% of donated kidneys, these are ones that have already been taken out of someone else's body, end up being thrown away without ever being implanted into somebody else. And in certain centers, this can be as high as 40%. So 40% of the kidneys that are available to them, they end up throwing away. And at first you might be thinking, well, surely they're discarded for a medical or logistical reason, like maybe they just couldn't get the kidney to the hospital in time. But research has shown time and time again that the number of discarded kidneys is much larger than what you would expect from any known medical or logistical issues. So the current consensus is that surgeons reject more kidneys than they need to. And one reason that they might do so is because they are imperfect decision makers under pressure. Now, when you hear about how these opportunities come about, it would be no surprise if they were imperfect decision makers. So in a typical scenario, a surgeon will receive a phone call and find out that a kidney is available for one of their patients. And they can get this phone call at any time. So they could be sleeping, it could be in the middle of the night, they could be at their daughter's wedding, they could be anywhere. And when they get that call, they only have half an hour to an hour to make a decision. And so you might think, well, that's a simple decision, take this kidney, obviously, but it's actually not that simple. And the first thing to know that I haven't yet been able to tell you is that not all donor kidneys are compatible with all patients. So the blood types of the donor and the recipient have to be compatible, but so do the immune profiles. And compatibility isn't black or white. Sometimes it is obvious that a kidney definitely will be compatible or definitely will not be compatible, but often it's not so clear. It's somewhere in between. Like they probably are somewhat compatible. And maybe if we gave the patient some immunosuppressant drugs, it would make it more likely that the kidney would be accepted. But the doctor has to estimate the compatibility in a relatively short amount of time with relatively little amount of information. And there's definitely a lot of uncertainty. In addition, the doctor wants to get the best kidney possible for their patient. So they try to get a sense of what shape each donor kidney is in, maybe how old the donor was, and what kind of health habits the donor might have had. And if they don't think the kidney is good enough quality, then they're going to be tempted to pass it on to somebody else and hope that another better one becomes available soon for their patients. So that's what the doctor is trying to assess in these very stressful time-limited opportunities. They're trying to assess things like how well will this kidney work for my patient, or how likely is it that a better kidney will become available in time for my patient? And these are very difficult things to predict, especially with limited information. And unfortunately, these are also exactly the types of decisions that humans are not very good at, and exactly the types of conditions that we are least reliable in. And there is indeed evidence that doctors' decision-making about accepting kidneys in these situations might be flawed and perhaps even unconsciously biased sometimes. So for example, there's a well-documented phenomenon called the weekend effect, which describes the fact that more kidneys are rejected on weekends than during the work week, much more so than can be explained by any medical or logistical factors. And the proposed explanation for why this happens is that transplant teams may be subconsciously or unintentionally reluctant to take advantage of opportunities that require them to work on a weekend. Likewise, kidneys from obese African-American women are rejected disproportionately to what would be expected from purely medical factors. And it's suspected that this may be due to completely unconscious racial bias against, or either racial bias or bias against people who are obese. So the good news is that as long as we have data to train it, and now we do, thanks to electronic health records, these are situations where AI can actually be very objective and make very accurate predictions in these uncertain situations. So one big thrust of moral AI efforts in this space are to make tools that can help remove some of the uncertainties doctors have to face when making these decisions and provide them with more accurate information. So these are not all from our groups. In fact, most of them are not, but one team working on these types of tools made a tool that would predict the disease stage of a patient. So it would help the doctor know really how much longer does your patient have to live. Another one made a tool that would predict individual compatibility. So how compatible is the donor kidney and the recipient. Another one tried to predict when another kidney would be available that would be compatible with the given patient. And some more experimental stuff that our group is working on is trying to come up with tools that would help unearth bias and inconsistency for a given decision maker and give them some feedback about when that might be happening. And first of all, there are two things to notice. You can see that all of these tools have a very specific goal. So they're not general at all. But in all of them, the other thing to notice is that the idea is not to replace humans, but rather to help and empower them to make decisions that are more in line with their ethical goals, which we presume, especially in the medical field, will include trying to save the most lives and trying to provide equitable healthcare. So I want to tell you about another another way AI is used in kidney transplants. And to do that, we have to talk about another way you can get a kidney transplant. And that's from a living donor. So it turns out that we all have, or most of us anyway, have 2 kidneys, but we only need 1 to live. Therefore, if a loved one needs a kidney, you can elect to give them one of yours. But the challenge is, or perhaps the tragedy is, that almost half of people who want to give a kidney to a specific person are not able to do so because either their blood type or their immune profile is not compatible with the other person's, for the reasons I told you about before. So you have thousands of people who are poised to save other people's lives, but they're stuck right before the finish line due to these incompatibility issues. Well, in 2004, an economist, of all things, came up with a very interesting idea to try to address this problem that eventually won him the Nobel Prize. So here's how the idea works. Eric needs a kidney, and Anne is ready and wants to give her kidney to Eric. The problem is Anne has one profile, Eric has a different, and they are incompatible with each other. Well, at the same time, you have another pair. Sarah needs a kidney, and John wants to give her his, but again, they're incompatible. But as you might notice, if you look at the profiles, turns out that Anne's kidney is compatible with Sarah, and John's kidney is compatible with Eric. So the idea that was proposed was, well, what if we got these people all together and they agreed to do a swap? What if Anne agreed to give her kidney to Sarah as long as John agreed to give his kidney to Eric? And it turns out that this works. People agree to do it. And when you do it, you can obviously save more lives. And this is what's called a two-way kidney exchange because it involves 2 pairs, but you can actually involve many more pairs than that. This, for example, is a 3-way exchange. So Anne, in this case, would give her kidney to Sarah, John would give his to Eva, and Bob would give his to Eric. So all of this may sound good in principle. At least I think it sounds good in principle. It has shown a lot of promise. But the challenge, of course, is how do you find the right sets of pairs of people to match together that, first of all, are going to be compatible, but second of all, who are going to be willing to do this type of exchange. So at first, all of these pairs were found by hand. Surgeons or perhaps the support teams kind of on their off hours would go through Excel spreadsheets and try to come up with different combinations and see if those combinations of people were willing to go into this type of exchange with each other. But it turns out that one kind of AI technology that is really well established at this point is what I'll broadly call matching technology. So technology that finds good matches among huge amounts of options with lots of variables. And so you might be familiar with these types of logos. All of these companies use some type of AI matching technology in their products. So for example, Match.com or OkCupid is trying to find matches of people who would like to date each other given on their profiles, and Lyft and Uber are trying to match people who are in a certain location and want to ride to go to another location with drivers who are in that general area and are willing to do so. So it turns out we can use the same technology to match kidney donors and recipients. And in fact, we can do so very successfully. So AI has now been implemented in kidney exchanges in many different places. And those that are powered by AI have dramatically increased the number of transplanted kidneys that they've implemented as a result. And in addition to just increasing the total numbers, there's also been just some really astounding accomplishments. One AI was able to put together a 6-way kidney exchange. That means 12 different patients had to have surgeries at the same time. And they have to have them at the same time because no one wants to give their kidney and then find out that another person backed out at the last moment. So these things tend to need to happen at least approximately simultaneously. And so another thing that happens when you have these really big kidney exchanges or kind of more pairs is that it's more likely that you're able to match someone who has a hard to match profile. So having these kind of bigger kidney exchanges can have a lot of different benefits. And there's also been one since then that's been 7-way. So that's 14 simultaneous surgeries at once. So I like this example because it's really one of the great success stories of moral AI AI in general, but AI that has really moral implications. And I think this quote from this article says it the best. Paired kidney donation is one of the great success stories of artificial intelligence. It doesn't eliminate jobs or scrub the human touch from medical care. It takes an incredibly complex problem and solves it faster and with fewer errors than humans can. And as a result, saves more lives. So I know I only have a couple more minutes. There is one more type of moral AI initiative in the context of kidney exchanges that I just want to make you aware of, partially because it's a little more controversial and I think it might spawn some interesting discussion. And that's what's illustrated by this New York Times article. This was actually from Hurricane Katrina. But in the recent past, not in the far past, you can ask me about that later, the factors that are used to make decisions about who will get kidneys or any other types of medical resources are decided by small ad hoc groups of doctors, administrators, and sometimes ethicists, but definitely not always ethicists. But in the past, maybe 5 years or so, and especially during the pandemic, entities are starting to think that maybe the public should be able to give some input into how these decisions are made, at least at a policy level. So many groups, including ours, have started to ask members of the public what factors they think should be considered when making kidney allocations or medical allocations. And when we asked, we found out that many people, sometimes the majority of people, think that there are factors that should be taken into account in these decisions that are not being currently taken into account. So one of the ones that really comes up often is how many dependents someone has. So people often think that patients that have young children that depend on them to live should get priority for medical resources over others who don't have dependents. And kind of in the other direction, many people think that patients who are heavy drinkers or have heavy smoking habits should be deprioritized compared to people who do not have those habits. We also have heard in many different contexts that there are factors that people think definitely should not be taken into account, or in other words, we should make sure that these factors do not influence who gets medical care. And that's race and how much money you have. So the question is, now that we have increasing idea of what the general public thinks about what kind of factors should go into these decisions, what can a government do about it? So if a government or policy agency wanted to take these factors into account, how could they do so in an objective, reliable, transparent way? Well, we think that using AI algorithms and sometimes modifying existing AI algorithms is the way to do that. And so that's one of the more experimental areas of research that moral AI is moving into and that our group here at Duke is working on. And so if you're interested in the details of how one might do this, please ask us during the question and answer period. We'll be happy to tell you. So as a quick summary, I've told you about 3 different opportunities for moral AI to help organ transplantation. It can improve clinical decision-making, identify optimal exchange chains, and it can help, at least we're working on ways to help it incorporate ethical factors into allocation decisions transparently and objectively. And although this is just one application area, a very specific one, hopefully it gives you an idea of what moral AI might look like and what kinds of things it might be able to do in other possible arenas. And just the last moment here, I just wanted to acknowledge something, which is that for some of you, when you hear these examples, you might think, great, this sounds good. So let's use AI to help us make moral decisions about who are going to get kidneys and other types of scarce, medical resources. But others of you may hear these examples and still feel a little uneasy. Maybe the idea of using AI in life and death decisions, or at least in health decisions, just still feels a little creepy and scary. And the reason why I want to say this is no matter which group you're in, or if you're somewhere in between, I want you to know that you're not alone. So in a study we did in 2018, which was led by a Duke undergrad, by the way, we asked people, imagine that another country is starting a kidney exchange and must determine what procedure will be used to coordinate exchanges. Decisions about which patients should be included in a given exchange should be made by, and then we asked people to say should be made by computers or should be made by humans. I'm going to show you a chart here, and on the y-axis, it's just the number of responses. And the exact numbers aren't important. The thing to notice is that approximately the same number of people said, yes, computers should definitely make that decision, as said, definitely humans should make that decision. And that's not that different from the people that were indifferent or everything in between. So, we as a society are still trying to figure out where we want AI to play its role. And one other thing that we learned in this research is that the more exposure you have to the idea of computers or AIs making or contributing to a certain type of decision, the more comfortable you are with the AIs making or contributing to those types of decisions in the future. So we think this is good news. It can be bad news too, but we think it's good news because although there are many ethicals to worry about with AI, like Vince pointed out, we also think that there are AI applications, like I hope you agree, some of the ones I described today, that will lead to better moral outcomes and in some cases, better moral decisions. So we are encouraged to know that maybe all we need to do is give ourselves a little time and get a little bit more exposed to the use of moral AI to be able to put these moral AI tools into action. And I too want to acknowledge the Duke Moral AI team. Vince had a better slide that involves all of our students. I just said talented students and trainees. And with that, I think we are ready to ask for questions and feedback.
Well, I will clap on behalf of everybody out there. What does that say? Oh, okay. Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Good. Okay, so I love moderating discussions because I get to ask questions and then they have to answer them. And there's one question that was asked in the chat that really is one that I've wanted to ask you guys for a long time, and Joe suggested it. So I'm going to start off with Ed Hammond. He actually asked 3 questions, but they're connected, so I'll ask them together. Are morals instinctive to humans, or are they taught? Can computers learn the same way? If computers learn from humans, are we in trouble? Okay, are they learned or are they innate? And can computers do it the same way? And are we in trouble? What do you think?
Maybe I'll start and I'll leave the hardest questions to Vince. So the question of are morals innate or learned, that is a raging debate, but I think that most people would agree both. So there are certain morals that are innate, and there are certain definitely predispositions, things like empathy, that are innate. But there are other aspects that are learned, and then people will debate about which ones are learned and which ones are more innate. And the second question was, can computers learn from humans? Was that it, Walter?
I think that was
Sorry,
the
I
third.
muted myself. The second question was, can computers learn in the same way as humans?
That's an interesting question. So I'll tell you my perspective from this, and then it'll be really interesting to hear Vince's perspective. So as a neuroscientist, especially when I first started kind of getting interested or hearing about AI, it seemed like computer scientists were trying to emulate the human brain. And then they gave up. They're like, there is no way this is going to work. And so then for a while, I stopped hearing about AI and kind of went on my merry neuroscience way. And then as data became more available, now some of the ideas that they were trying to pull from the brain all of a sudden started working because you needed enough data and you need enough processing power. And so I think the answer is complicated. I think that there are some things that we can implement in AI systems that emulate the human brain pretty well. And there are other things that we either don't know how to, or we don't even know what we're trying to do yet. And of course, the biggest picture, can we completely emulate the human brain? I mean, that's always the biggest question in AI. And I still lean towards no, but I've been, you should know one thing if you're in science, and that's that you should never say anything too definitively. So that was my long-winded answer. What do you think, Vince?
Thanks, Janet. That was a good answer. Sorry, I'm trying to figure out my Zoom keyboard shortcuts as my pointer has disappeared. Forever learning. So I'll leave. I thought the answer to the first question that you gave was great, and I can't do better on that for sure. The second answer was good too. So, can computers learn morals in the same way that human beings can? Now, short answer in some sense is no, not right now. Because when we learn that, we learn it in the context of learning lots of other stuff, right? And so we grow up and we develop a common sense understanding of the world. And together with that, hopefully we develop our sense of ethics as well. And I was going to say at some point, I mentioned Jeopardy, right? And that's a really impressive achievement. But I always claim, and I hope somebody will take me up on this one day, that I can design a version of Jeopardy where my 8-year-old crushes Watson, right? It's just the kind of questions that you ask, because you can ask certain common sense questions that the systems today wouldn't figure out. And because of that, because our sense of morality is so tied up with our common sense reasoning, right now, computers cannot learn morality in the same way that we do. Now, there's a broader question of whether the right route to designing AI systems is by imitating how humans learn and reason versus whether we should just do something else entirely. And there are different parts of the AI community that follow different approaches to that. And as Jana said, while the way that AI and in particular machine learning works today, it's not exactly like the human brain. And if anything, it's pretty loose inspiration from the human brain. But nevertheless, that kind of approach is doing a little bit better these days probably than many of the other approaches where we just really wanted to design everything from scratch without any inspiration from nature whatsoever. But that tends to swing back and forth. So I don't know if it's going to stay that way. But that's kind of a big debate in the AI community. And an interesting aspect is that as AI researchers make progress on these questions, we often in turn actually learn something about the human brain and how it works and how learning in general could work. So lots of interesting and complex questions. For now, if we try to have our systems learn how to do moral reasoning on their own, the easiest way to do that is by means of human provided judgments, right? So this is in some of our kidney exchange work that Jana mentioned is of course doing exactly that. And so that leads nicely to the third question. If our AI systems learn from human beings what the right decision to make is, does that leave us in trouble? Maybe, right? So humans have their own biases and flaws. And I imagine that if we somehow could train an AI system on what people felt was the right thing to do 50 years ago, we would be horrified by what that system does. And so consequently, we should also be worried about what we train it to do today might be perceived as pretty horrible 50 years from now. Of course, we can always update the systems in principle, right? But that's something to be aware of. So that approach leaves you kind of stuck at today's society level human moral reasoning. And you might want more than that, right? So maybe you can somehow come up with a different approach to AI doing moral reasoning. But it's hard. And it's again hard because AI systems don't have that broad understanding of the world that we use in our judgments of what is the right thing to do here, what is the right thing to do there. So it's not clear without figuring that out how it could do better than we can.
Maybe I'll just add my kind of 2 cents to that last question. Are we in trouble? I don't know if we're in trouble or not, but I'll tell you that the things I'm worried about the most is not AI itself taking over. It's the way humans and society are responding to kind of the AI industry and what AI can do. So it's often right now, it's not AI that'll get us in trouble. It's how humans are using AI or how people are, what kind of incentives are put in place to collect data that can create AIs. Those are the things that worry me more than the AI itself, personally.
Good. So the second question comes from Rich Eichen, and he says, he asks, how would AI, I guess, how would or should AI adapt to different cultural norms? In the trolley problem, I guess he means the, like the moral machine, autonomous vehicle deciding which way to go in an emergency. In the trolley problem, one society may minimize damage to people on the street, while another society may stress protecting the vehicle occupants. Can a car manufacturer be required to produce country-specific AI?
Vince, I'm going to let you take this one because this is your specialty.
Sounds good. I don't know if it's my specialty, but yeah, so that's an interesting question. So can it? Sure. I mean, there's nothing really preventing anybody from having regulation that says, no, you can't sell your self-driving vehicles in my country unless you have them behave in such and such way. So it's certainly possible. But is that the right way to proceed? Probably to some extent, yes, right? That, like, of course, if you sort of took this broadly enough, my AI system might learn here that, well, the right thing to do is to drive on the right side of the road. And then if I try to deploy that in the UK, maybe that's not such a good idea, right? So there are probably some aspects of norms and expectations that you do, especially in traffic, really want to have local. If it's a question about prioritizing different people over other people, that's maybe not so clear. One aspect I think to take into account in general is that, well, and this is something that I think we haven't been able to do as much research on, right? But as you deploy these vehicles with a particular objective or a particular way of driving, it's going to change everybody's behavior on the road, right? If I have an extremely conservative self-driving car that stops for anybody, right? You jump in front of my self-driving car, it will come to a screeching halt, right? People might start to take advantage of that, right? Maybe not so, let's not think about pedestrians, but like, let's say you could just cut it off, right? And everybody knows that if you cut off my self-driving car, it will back down. Or if you even come close to that, maybe, everybody starts to take advantage of that. And so that's not necessarily a bad thing, but there's generally a question of, well, what happens to driving behavior as a whole, right? Because we don't drive in isolation, we drive as a community of people. And so we have certain expectations and norms. So you probably want to agree with those to some extent to be a reasonable driver in a particular community. More broadly, if you're not talking about self-driving cars, right, there are lots of these questions of at what level should we set the expectations for AI and how it behaves. That might also, right, like how do we deal with issues such as data privacy. Now, there's other issues, right? If you think internationally, if one country has much looser regulations on this than another country, that might lead to that former country being able to develop in some ways much better AI technology, putting the other country at a disadvantage. So should we somehow come up with international rules for preventing that or keeping things fair? Of course, and I'm not saying, in the long run, actually, it might be the country that thought carefully about what the right rules are that actually comes out ahead. So I don't want to give the wrong impression there, but there are, I think, questions about how should you internationally coordinate on these things, which things should be local, for which things should we have some international standards. That's above my pay grade, but I think those are good questions to think about.
Jana, do you have anything to add?
That was a good answer.
Okay. So I think the next question comes from Deb Mayers, and she asks, as machine learning and artificial intelligence become more popular, what safeguards do you imagine we would need to ensure all people are represented equally are represented and equally treated in the algorithms? For example, ensuring with our voice recognition that we remember people who stutter or have strong accents.
I could talk a little bit about this one. So by the way, first of all, I'm not a native English speaker. I'm a native Dutch speaker. And so every once in a while, I do actually struggle, like, it doesn't quite pick up what I'm saying correctly. But for the most part, I'm okay. My kids had a teacher here whose native language is Italian. And you can understand her perfectly. Her English is great, but she still has a notable accent. And so that was totally fine. And then the pandemic hit, and they were in their Google Classrooms, and the Google Classroom allowed you to caption the teacher automatically by AI. And this did not work on her voice at all. And so the kids were, giggling and being distracted because it had these captions that were completely silly and clearly not what she was saying. Whereas native American English speakers didn't have this problem in the classroom. So that's a very concrete example of what you're saying. And we see this more generally, right? There are different kinds of biases that these technologies might have. They might not work for certain groups of people. They might also make decisions about certain kinds of or certain groups of people in a way that is biased, right? So when we think about, for example, AI in the criminal justice system, right? So now AI is in some places used in the criminal justice system to give some partial recommendation about who should be released on bail, for example. And so there, it's not just necessarily that the technology isn't working well, but it might actually, the risk is that it makes biased decisions and that it actually somehow might take race into account, maybe indirectly based on other features in a way that we wouldn't want. And so how do we make sure this doesn't happen? What's the right avenue to that? There are different groups of people that think about this, right, and different approaches that they take. There are computer scientists and statisticians that try to somehow formalize what it would mean to be fair, right? And so maybe, I talked about objective functions earlier, somehow build this into the objective function that the different groups should be treated equally. And there are a lot of debates about what really is the right definition. And you come up with 5 different definitions that all seem perfectly reasonable, but then they turn out to be horribly inconsistent with each other. So that's one approach. It's a difficult one. You can think about the training data. Many of these applications involve machine learning, and they need to have training data. And that can be a problem, right? That's maybe the historical training data. You don't have data on any underrepresented groups, and so it doesn't work as well for them, or it maybe biases against them. So another approach is you try to get better training data. Those are kind of technical approaches. But there are other groups of people that think about this and worry about. So what else can you do? Well, you can try to make sure that people from different communities are in the room when the algorithm is being designed, when the product is being designed, and thereby at least give them a chance to raise concerns that that other people might not even have thought about, but that are really serious. There's activism, right? So there are groups of people that try to raise awareness of these issues in the first place, and they've done some very valuable work. I think in these communities at this point, most people are aware, and it's more a question of where do we go from here at this point. Regulation is another one, right? So, is there a role for government? Do the companies really need to kind of govern themselves? There is some amount of self-governance, if you will, or the companies, like the big tech companies, really thinking about ethics and trying to restrain themselves from doing things that wouldn't be right. So that's, I think that's a good development, but it's maybe limited. Maybe they don't fully limit themselves to the extent that that would be societally desirable, right? Maybe if there's something that's so fundamental to their business, they wouldn't want to give that up. And another concern is that even if the big tech companies, maybe they feel they have too much to lose in terms of reputation, but meanwhile, some small startup says, well, we don't have much reputation to lose. We'll build this kind of horrible product and see where it goes, right? So that may be, maybe not what you would expect, but maybe in some sense, the big tech companies would also have some advantage or perceive some advantage from certain types of regulation, at least. So there are all these communities that try to approach these topics in different ways. It doesn't seem like any one of those communities is going to have the answer. It really requires an interdisciplinary collaboration and communication between all those groups of people that care about this topic. And we try to get that to happen. There are scientific conferences and other conferences where really very interdisciplinary communities of people interested in AI get together and try to hash these things out. I don't think we've fully hashed them out yet, but I think there's some progress. So yeah, so I don't think I can give you any one silver bullet that really would solve all of this. But I think there's good work being done from various angles, and it will probably take some combination of all of that to make it work.
I saw we can only have one more question, so why don't you ask the one more question, Walter?
Okay, and it's got to be quick, so because we're running out of time. How about this one? With machine learning, neural networks, and so on, scientists often find it difficult to explain why the algorithm reached a particular result. Do humans have a moral right to an explanation? For example, why was I denied the loan? Why didn't I get the job? Question mark. And let me point out, it's a yes/no question. Do they have that right?
Well, Walter has taught me well that I don't like getting put into a box. And so, as Walter will often say to us, sometimes. So there are some cases where I think, yes, we do as humans have a moral right, especially when it impacts us in a profound way or that there are any type of moral consequences or ethical consequences. There are other cases where I think it's less clear if we have a moral right or would even care. So I don't know if we really care why say Siri does or does not understand what we say. Maybe we care if they understand me better than someone who's from a different ethnicity, but I don't know if we always care about all the details, about all the models, and that we have a moral right to them, especially if it has no impact on us.
Vince, anything to add?
Yeah. No, I think Jana's answer is exactly right. There is a question of what we can do as well, right? That some of the techniques that are popular in AI today, it's very hard to diagnose why exactly they made that decision. So even if, if we use those techniques, even if we wanted to explain why it made the decision that it did, it might actually be hard for us to trace down exactly why that happened. We can maybe suspect kind of what happened, but it might be difficult. There are other techniques that would not be like that, where you could actually be very clear about why it made the decision that it did. There are worries that maybe those won't have the same level of performance. People disagree about that. One of my colleagues here at Duke, Cynthia Rudin, thinks a lot about this. So she works on interpretable machine learning. So ways to do machine learning where you really know precisely why it made the prediction that it did, or why it made the decision that it did. And she will argue that those systems work just as well as the ones that you can't interpret. So there's hope there, I think. Sometimes you might also worry that people use these kind of more black boxy things that are hard to interpret for other more cynical reasons, that maybe they don't want other people to know exactly how it works, right? Maybe they would perceive some loss of advantage or some loss of reputation, that their magical system actually turns out to do something super simple that anybody else could replicate. So I think, not to say that everybody doing non-interpretable work does that, right? But it's something to be aware of as well. And certainly there are a lot of people that try to make machine learning algorithms more interpretable, or at least to some extent explainable. It's a big area in terms of research, and hopefully that will help somewhat as well.
Great. Well, thank you very much. I'm afraid we're out of time. Joe, do you have some final comments?
Yes, I just put in the chat. Interestingly enough, the last question leads us to our next session, which will take place October 27th with Assistant Professor David Carlson, who's going to talk about opening the black box. Also in our syllabus, you'll find a few resources written by Cynthia Rudin. So if you'd like to dig into that a little bit more before our next session, please feel free. I've included in the chat also the link to our YouTube channel. Today's event will be posted and available for you in a few days for you to share with people who may have missed this opportunity. And we really look forward to seeing you at our next Forever Learning Institute. Thank you, Vincent, Jana, Walter, always a pleasure. And thank you to our audience for joining us and learning with us today. We look forward to seeing you next time.
I just wanted to say thank you to the audience. Great questions.
Yes, thank you all.
Thanks, everybody.